The Jehovah's Witness religion is guilty of many crimes, from CSA cover-ups to shunning children, and while there are many lawsuits against them for those and many other reasons, there's only one thing that Jehovah's Witnesses do that is more widespread and far more illegal. One thing that could not just change the nature of this religion, but if prosecuted, could destroy this religion and even have countries fighting for the right to imprison the leadership.
We are neutral.
Even if we don't march with protesters, might we be with them in spirit?
Jehovah's Witnesses suppress voters, except they don't call it voter suppression. They call it political neutrality.
So as Christians, what is our position where political matters are concerned? We are neutral. It's true we don't vote for political parties or candidates. It's true we don't lobby, campaign, or run for government office.
Even in their frequently asked questions, they publicly state,
Jehovah's Witnesses remain politically neutral for religious reasons, based on what the Bible teaches. We do not lobby, vote for political parties or candidates, run for government office, or participate in any action to change governments.
This is one of the most crucial parts of being a Jehovah's Witness, since they see their own political neutrality as evidence that they are the one true religion on earth.
Look, Mark, I understand you don't like to get involved in politics. I don't either. But if we don't protest this new bill, our company is going to get hit with cutbacks and layoffs.
Joel, don't get me wrong. I'm concerned too, but I won't join the protest.
Okay, so you won't stand in line and protest, but at least sign the sheet to show you support the protest. It's not like you're voting or joining a political party. Your name won't even be noticed. We just need signatures.
Did he sign the paper?
No. And you know why? At that moment, he said a silent prayer that gave him the courage needed to remain neutral. I commended him and I reminded him that displaying courage now is going to help him in the future.
This is baked into the very basis of what it means to be a Jehovah's Witness. To become a Jehovah's Witness, regardless of whether you were found in the preaching work or were born in the cult, you have to study with a Jehovah's Witness, reading one of their books that tells you the basics of being a Jehovah's Witness. Since what it means to be a Jehovah's Witness is always changing, the book has also been changing, with new books being published every few years to better reflect the current version of this religion. And most versions of that book, including the current one, have that voting prohibition on writing in pretty much every language imaginable. The current version of that book is called Enjoy Life Forever and talks about this prohibition in lesson 45, what it means to be neutral. It opens with their biggest excuse for doing voter suppression, so we will debunk that first. You see, there's nothing in the Bible that prevents you from voting or even running for office. Religious leaders have always been influential, even starting revolutions sometimes. That's because Jesus himself was involved in politics so much that he would have been considered a political activist in our days. He criticized people who hoarded money, saying repeatedly how hard it would be for those to receive their reward in heaven. He actively, and some would say violently, threw money charges from the temple, directly being against the political economy of exploiting worshippers. And his most famous political act was being consistently against Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were not just the religious leaders, but also political collaborators with the Roman Empire. And what was his most consistent critique? That those religious leaders care more about their political power and control over people than about the religious mission of genuine spirituality and justice. The Jesus from the Gospels is a political activist who sees a corrupt system and goes directly against it. Jehovah's Witnesses even believe this, since Jesus advocated for a new kingdom, the kingdom of God, which Jehovah's Witnesses believe refers to a literal political government. This kingdom was the solution against the corrupt political Roman system enforced through violence and suppression that Jesus found, and instead offered a system based on divine justice, equity, and love, which included the marginalized people of their time and minorities, like the women, the poor, the lepers, and the Samaritans, in a completely new social structure. He was such an influential political activist that his activism met the same end that many activists have always faced in totalitarian regimes, being executed by the government. His claims of being the king of the Jews was seen as a direct challenge to Caesar's rule, which really shows us how influential Jesus truly was in politics for his mere existence to be considered a threat to the Caesar himself. Jesus lived his whole recorded life criticizing the government and advocating for a new form of government that would redistribute wealth and would include marginalized minorities. Wait, isn't that what the Christian Republicans are completely against? Really makes you think, huh? Anyway, Jesus was not just involved in politics, he died because of his involvement in politics, and his movement ended up being an important factor for the fall of the Roman Empire that he criticized so much, even if it wasn't as he envisioned it. The ministry of Jesus was as political as it was spiritual, and he got executed not because it was mostly the latter, but because it was mostly the former. So how can a Christian religion like the Jehovah's Witnesses say that they shouldn't get involved in politics? Well, mostly by cherry-picking Bible verses, especially the one in John chapter 18, verse 36. After talking about how they do pay taxes, like that has anything to do with voting, they immediately quote that Bible verse completely. They quote the part where Jesus said, "My kingdom is no part of this world," and built their whole voting suppression on that verse alone. That is the verse that they use to prohibit members from enlisting in the army. That is why they do not sing the national anthem nor salute the flag, and that is why they do not vote. Their rationale is that since you have to be all for God's government, and since you can't vote for that government on the ballot, then you shouldn't vote at all, ever, because the only vote you can ever cast should be to God's government. They even lie and say that Jesus was not involved in politics simply because he rejected the efforts of people that one time when they tried to make him a literal king. At this point, you can clearly see the cherry picking for what it is. Saying that Jesus was not involved in politics is literally ignoring and rejecting the very reason why he got executed, which is kind of the most important thing in Jesus' very political career. That is where this all stems from, but it's not where it all ends. Because as a Jehovah's Witness, it's not enough that you reject exercising your right to vote or to run for political office. You can't even take sides in your mind.
And even though I always knew that we must remain neutral, I secretly approved of the demonstrations. To rationalize saying, I was created in Jehovah's image, and Jehovah is a just God. What was speaking was my sense of justice. I thought neutrality was shown through actions and not through what I felt. There was another phrase that really moved me. It said, "Even if we don't march with protesters, might we be with them in spirit?" Yes, I was with them, yes. There were several phrases in that article that were written just for me.
And if you think that's excessive, you haven't seen the part of the video where they make it clear that you cannot even take sides on sports.
Outside, I wasn't jumping up and down or cheering. But on the inside, I was saying, "Come on, let's win." It was all about the desire, the crowd, the pride of your team having the most victories or the most trophies. To Jehovah, it's not important if my country has 5 or 6 titles, or if it won or lost the World Cup. To Jehovah, all people are equal.
Yes, that's how far they take their political neutrality. They aren't even allowed to cheer for a team in their head while watching sports. And just like the Pharisees of Jesus' time, they extend their made-up rules, so it applies to them not keeping scores when they themselves are practicing some competitive sport. If Jehovah's Witnesses are playing football or basketball, they're not supposed to keep track of who's winning. They're supposed to play just for the fun of playing. Really think about it. Jesus said that his kingdom was not part of the world, and Jehovah's Witnesses not only took it as the sign that they should not vote nor get involved in politics, but as Jesus telling them that they can't keep score when they're shooting some hoops. That's because the politics prohibition isn't really about keeping Jehovah's Witnesses from getting involved in politics. It's about control. In Combating Cult Mind Control by Stephen Hassan, he identifies 4 key elements a group, religious or otherwise, must control to qualify as a cult or a high control organization. Those 4 are behavior, information, thoughts, and emotion in what he calls the BITE model. And the Jehovah's Witnesses are a high control group. That is why they tell people not to just not vote, but they tell people to not even think about taking sides. Their voting prohibition controls their behavior, making sure they don't do anything related to politics.
Afterwards, besides having to face peer pressure nearly every day, I was demoted. One year the children didn't attend school because we didn't have enough money. Even for our day-to-day needs, it became difficult. I didn't neglect spiritual things. I always kept busy attending the meetings, participating at the meetings, in the ministry, with my personal study, and even more so with my prayer to Jehovah.
They control the information that they consume since they are discouraged from consuming political content.
When I cut back watching so many news reports, and I had to, this helped me to have self-control when I spoke to others at work. When workmates mentioned something that was in the news, I didn't have anything to say since I hadn't seen it. I didn't know about it. A workmate would say, "Did you see that so-and-so said this?" and that someone else made a statement. I would say, "No, I didn't see it." And that was the end of the conversation.
And they very clearly control their thoughts and emotions with these videos telling them exactly what to feel and what is okay and not okay to think about, even when you are by yourself.
If put to the test, I do want to take my stand for Jehovah, but the outcome of all these things can affect me now, my family, my goals. How can I stay neutral, even in my heart?
Even if we don't march with protesters, might we be with them in spirit? Yes, I was with them, yes.
This isn't about politics. This is about a cult trying to enforce unity. You see, the biggest weakness of any cult is the ability of someone to think by themselves. In a cult, you need to surrender your thinking and reasoning to whatever the leader or leaders want you to think and believe. If this cult is against beards, then you have to be against beards. If this cult is suddenly okay with beards, then you have to be okay with beards too. And very few things exert more control in this cult than their prohibition on voting. This is an isolationist supremacist cult that discourages anyone from getting involved in politics because that would cause 2 devastating things for this cult: disunity and individual thinking. Voting is the most consequential thing you can do as an individual to change your material conditions. But if you want to vote, then you gotta get informed on policy, and now you gotta get informed in history to see how those policies have played out in other countries and figure out which policies and reforms had a better shot at succeeding and which candidate is better aligned with them. You need to spend quite a bit of time doing what this cult hates its followers to do: external research. And if every Jehovah's Witness is doing it, then everyone will arrive at different conclusions about which policies are better and why, who deserves their vote, and overall on how to make the world a better place here and now. Jehovah's Witnesses already get told how to make the world a better place here and now. It's by spending time working for free for this cult, either looking for converts or expanding the cult's real estate portfolio. The leadership can't stand for this, not just because they would lose their free labor, but because it would chip away at their artificial unity. You are supposed to be friends with every single Jehovah's Witness and be united in thought with them. How can you do that when everyone has the freedom to think and vote for whomever they want? No, it's far easier to simply prohibit them from voting, from getting involved in politics, and from even taking a side in their head. And all of that is illegal. Look, if we stopped here, I could make a good argument of why this is illegal. At the end of the day, voting is a vital right in pretty much every country because it's the basis of a democratic government. You can't use your influence as a religious leader and take the money and tax exemptions that a government gives to religious leaders just to oppose the foundation of the government. The Jehovah's Witnesses are a tax-exempt religious organization that has to abide by the Internal Revenue Code to keep being tax-exempt. As a 501c3 organization in the United States, they are required to abstain from certain types of political activity to retain tax-exempt status. They can take positions on moral and social issues, but they are forbidden from direct political endorsement, lobbying, or attempting to interfere in the election in any way, shape, or form. I could make a case that, while discouraging voting itself is not direct political intervention, the IRS could interpret it as an indirect political intervention, violating the rules for 501c3 organizations. After all, you can't get free money from the government and from taxpayers if you use it to try to get people against the mere foundation of the government. This isn't about individual freedom of speech. If the government is funding you with taxpayers' money, then you can't use your government-funded platform to go against the government. That doesn't mean anyone goes to jail, by the way. And it doesn't even mean that this religion can't tell people not to vote. It only means that they can tell people not to vote while also getting government funding and tax-exempt status. This would likely result in some fines, and if they insist on being against voting, the removal of their religious status, which would simply mean that they now can't get access to government grants and that they now have to start paying taxes. And this would be devastating for a religion that has built their organization on not paying taxes for everything it does and on getting free money and free grants from governments just for the mere fact of existing. But this isn't where it all ends, because it's what they do to people who decide to vote that makes this the most illegal thing that this cult does. Using your platform to tell people not to vote is one thing, but it's what this religion does against the ones who insist on voting anyway that makes this very illegal. Because when you do something that the cult considers really bad, you get kicked out and shunned by everyone in the religion, friends and family included.
So what is the very best thing we can do for those who are disfellowshipped? We already read it in 1 Corinthians 5:11. Stop keeping company with them, not even eating with them. And speaking of the same sort of person, the Apostle John wrote it, 2 John 10, do not receive him into your homes or say a greeting to him. Now, our loyalty is on the line, not to the disfellowshipped person, but to God, who is watching to see whether we will abide by his command not to have contact with those who are disfellowshipped. Some of Jehovah's people may think this is too drastic, and that their keeping in contact with the disfellowshipped friend or relative is a kindness. But they could not be more wrong about that.
They've been revising the shunning rules, so there are basically two levels of shunning once you get kicked out. Jehovah's Witnesses are now allowed to acknowledge the existence of removed people if they see them in the congregation meetings and can even talk with them sometimes.
When a person has been removed from the congregation, we stop keeping company with that person, not even eating with such a man. That means we don't socialize with those who are removed from the congregation. However, that does not mean that a Christian could not invite a disfellowshipped person to attend a congregation meeting. That disfellowshipped person could be a relative, a former Bible student, or someone we were close to in the past.
But that only happens if you show some kind of repentance for it. If you're an apostate, someone who goes against the religion outright, you still get fully shunned.
Doesn't 2 John 9-11 tell us not to say a greeting to anyone who's been removed from the congregation? In examining the context of those verses, the governing body has concluded that the Apostle John was really describing apostates and others who actively promote wrong conduct. For good reason, John strongly directed Christians not even to greet such a person because of his contaminating influence. Therefore, if a disfellowshipped individual is a known apostate or someone who actively promotes wrongdoing, the elders would not visit him. Neither would individual Christians greet such a person or invite him to attend a congregation meeting.
Now, what's the difference? Well, it's outlined in the secret manual that only elders of the congregation, men who are in charge of removing people and make sure that the rules are followed, have access to. This manual, called Shepherd the Flock of God, makes a distinction between removing or disfellowshipping someone and disassociation. If you do a sin that the religion doesn't like doing it with someone who isn't your spouse, being gay, cheating, getting drunk, and all that kind of stuff, the process is the same. A group of elders interrogate you and judge you in private. Then you have 7 days to appeal the decision. That's simple disfellowshipping or now removal of the congregation for a sin that isn't against the religion, only against the religion's doctrine. If you do something against the religion itself, you don't get removed. You are considered to have disassociated yourself. And the Secret Elders Manual is very specific on how and when someone gets disassociated. In the disassociation chapter under section 3, it lists the specific circumstances in which Jehovah's Witnesses get disassociated. By saying that you do not want to be a part of this cult anymore, by joining another religion, by accepting blood, usually in the form of blood transfusions, which is a whole can of worms that we won't be touching in this video, and by taking a course that violates Christian neutrality. If he joins a non-neutral organization, he has disassociated himself. If his employment makes him a clear accomplice in non-neutral activities, he should generally be allowed 6 months to make an adjustment. If he does not, he has disassociated himself. This is talking about someone who is not just running for office, but joining any kind of political party or movement, regardless of whether it is the NRA, BLM, or even cleaning the floors at the UN. Unless you're working for the government itself, working for any kind of company that is perceived as political will get you kicked out and shunned. It's not that you're not just prohibited from running for office, you are prohibited from getting a receptionist job for someone running for office. This is listed followed by a few abbreviations in parentheses. These abbreviations are the most important part of the whole chapter because it lists not just the cherry-picked Bible verses that Jehovah's Witnesses use to pretend voter suppression is Bible-based, but because it also lists an additional resource. To every Jehovah's Witness, elders included, these abbreviations are pretty much the basis of the rule. And listed next to 2 Bible verses, the leadership added their own book. LVS is the reference for the book How to Remain in God's Love, a book with rules that Jehovah's Witnesses have to follow. It lists the bit of the book that talks about political neutrality, and then it also lists page 244, which is part of the endnotes of the book. These endnotes tell you far more information about very specific prohibitions like masturbation, head coverings, and political neutrality.
When we are neutral, we refuse to take sides in political matters. Jehovah's people support his kingdom. We are neutral in the affairs of the world, just as Jesus was. Jehovah commands us to be obedient to governments and authorities, but God's law also says that we should not murder. So a Christian's conscience would not allow him to go to war. If a Christian has the option of doing civilian work as an alternative to military service, he must consider whether his conscience allows him to do so. We worship only Jehovah because he is our creator. Although we show respect for national symbols, we would not salute a flag or sing a national anthem. Also, Jehovah's people make a personal decision not to vote for any political party or candidate. This is because we have already taken the side of God's government.
Notice the extremely careful wording here. It says Jehovah's people make a personal decision not to vote for any political party or candidate, except this is the opposite of a personal decision because they're being told what to do, or in this case, what not to do, especially because there's a threat involved. I can say that you're making a personal decision to support me on Patreon if you're doing because I'm holding your family hostage. That's not a personal decision. That's a coerced decision. And that's basically what this religion does by not just telling members not to vote, but by making voting a disassociation offense. Because disassociation is going against this cult. And you get full shunning from members, family and friends included.
It's been difficult. Something was missing. Our son. It was like watching a movie of someone else's family. I couldn't believe this was happening to us. Our son Levi was no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I was so torn. I was disappointed in Levi for leaving Jehovah, but I was more disappointed in myself. I felt like we failed him somehow. I kept wondering how he was doing. Was he okay? Then, as hard as the past few weeks had been, it just got harder. I knew what the Bible said about quit mixing in company with anyone who is not living according to Christian standards, but I never thought that scripture would one day apply to me.
This is what takes this practice from a simple violation into full criminal activity under state and federal law. The Civil Rights Act of 1957 protects the right to vote and prohibits acts of intimidation or coercion aimed at interfering with an individual's voting rights, which leaves them open to civil liability. The IRS could also revoke their status as a 501c3 organization for engaging in activities that violate public policy or constitute substantial political activity. And that is on top of the criminal charges that can be levied against this cult for voter intimidation and for conspiring to violate civil rights. According to Section 11B of the Voting Rights Act, any person who intimidates, threatens, or coerces someone regarding voting can face criminal penalties, including fines and imprisonment. Also, under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 241, conspiring to injure, oppress, or intimidate individuals in the free exercise of their voting rights can result in up to 10 years in prison or more, especially if violence or severe threats are involved. You know, like your whole family never ever talking to you ever again. And we haven't even talked about state-level penalties for voter intimidation, coercion, or suppression, and the potential criminal and civil consequences according to each law in each state, because this would be the biggest act of voter suppression and intimidation in the history of the United States. I want you to truly get the scale of this. In the United States, the Jehovah's Witnesses report to have 1.2 million members. This number is the number of baptized members of the religion, and people usually get baptized in their teenage years, which means that the vast majority of these people counts as potential voters. The leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses is suppressing over 1 million potential voters, which is enough to swing the last election if they're placed in the right states like Pennsylvania, and more than enough to swing an election as close as the 2016 election between Trump and Hillary Clinton. However, although this cult is headquartered in the United States, and although this cult interferes in the elections of the United States, that is not the only country it interferes with, because every single one of the almost 9 million Jehovah's Witnesses around the world is coerced the exact same way. The rules we read about in the Elder's Manual apply to every Jehovah's Witness regardless of their location. Practically every country has laws against voter suppression or coercion. Europe has strong legal protections for individual rights under frameworks like the European Conventions on Human Rights, which guarantees the right to free and fair elections. In the United Kingdom, electoral laws under the Representation of People Act of 1983 make it illegal to intimidate, deceive, or unduly influence voters. And in Germany, interfering with a person's right to vote can violate constitutional protections under the Basic Law. And the Jehovah's Witnesses are registered as a religion or charity there, and in pretty much every other country. Not only are they registered, they depend on their tax-exempt status and the grants they get as a religious or charitable organization to exist. The Jehovah's Witness cult is coercing voters and interfering with elections in every single country that they're registered as a tax-exempt institution. They're coercing almost 9 million people around the world in a voter suppression effort that is truly unprecedented. And I'm not saying it's unprecedented because I want to be dramatic or clickbaity. I'm saying it's unprecedented because after researching this video for over 2 months, I literally cannot find any single legal precedent where a religion has coerced this many voters for this long in these many countries around the world. At one point, I started thinking that maybe I was missing something, because how could I be the very first person shining light on this very clearly illegal thing this cult does? And I think it's because this cult literally primes you to not think about politics. So CSA issues and shunning children, which are not uncommon in the religion, very easily stick out as the most illegal thing this cult does when you wake up from it. Once you start getting involved in politics, you've probably already left the XJW sphere and might not even reflect on how illegal this alleged neutrality is. However, that's a mistake, because the best way to go after this cult to change its damaging ways is by going after the leadership for the illegal things they force their members to do. Because the tax-exempt status doesn't affect the average Jehovah's Witness, but it definitely affects the leadership. And the leadership doesn't like when it doesn't have something that it used to have. In Norway, the religion was sued and ended up losing its religious status and the grants they got from the government. Immediately after, the religion made it so children would have a harder time getting removed from the congregation, and even relaxed its shunning laws for the very first time since they were implemented.
Under our new arrangement, 2 elders will meet with the minor and his Christian parents. The elders will find out what steps the parents have already taken to help their child come to repentance. If the minor has a good attitude and the parents are reaching him, the 2 elders might decide that it isn't necessary to take the matter any further.
They didn't get rid of shunning, not even when it comes to children.
However, what if a baptized minor unrepentantly persists in a wrong course? In that case, a committee of elders would meet with him along with his Christian parents.
But they still made a lot of changes right before crawling back to the Norwegian government asking for their free money and status back. Something which, by the way, the government said no, because, they still shun children. And shunning children is terrible, of course, but this religion coerces far more voters than it shuns children, with the prohibition on voting being far more black and white in their own publications than their shunning children policy. This isn't just the most illegal thing this cult does. This is also the most incriminating one, because their illegal voter suppression and coercion policies are literally written down. These practices aren't just illegal, they are a basic control tactic for the leadership to use against their followers. Voter suppression might be the most illegal thing that this cult does, but it's definitely not the worst this cult does. Even in this video, we have brought up their homophobia, the control they exert over people's sexuality, their blood policy that forbids people from accepting life-saving treatment, and that's before talking about the damages that joining this or any other high control group will inevitably produce in your personal life and in your mental health. Voting isn't about being neutral. The governing body organizes political letter campaigns against Putin whenever it wants. It supervised their NGO status for close to a decade in the UN so it could lobby governments around the world. It even condemns governments constantly, which is definitely not the neutral thing to do, because their voting prohibition isn't about neutrality. It's about control. It's about keeping members ignorant and passive so they can't think of improving the world without this cult, and so they can't think individually and talk about the divisive political topics amongst each other so they can maintain a forced and fake unity. Or else. Don't vote for someone to make your life better. Your only chance to make your life better is by helping build these things for this cult. Because they know that once Jehovah's Witnesses start thinking by themselves, once they start getting informed and looking at the world, that is when they have a chance to wake up from their indoctrination and leave the cult all by themselves. That's how I woke up from my indoctrination, after all. Allowing members to vote would not only be the right and legal thing to do, but it would also give them a pass to do what no cult ever wants its members to do: get informed and get involved. That is why yesterday I collected all of the information I mentioned in this video and I sent it to the Ministry of the Interior, concretely to their General Directorate of Religious Associations. This is the very first step to bring this religion to justice in my country, and I will not stop pursuing this until I take it all the way to the end. The General Directorate usually has between 20 to 30 business days to respond to it, and I'll be letting you know as soon as I have updates. The way I see it, only three things can happen. Either they tell me that this religion can suppress voters, and that's totally okay, which would only be likely if I made a mistake while filing the report, at which point I would just appeal and appeal again. Otherwise, they would notify the religion, which would lead them to either the religion changing their policies or to the religion losing its tax-exempt status and bleeding money. Either way, this is just starting. So far, I have only done like a report, but I think it's only a matter of time until I need to go to Mexico City myself to testify, to follow up, or to do any of the other things that the bureaucrats want me to do. I might even need to hire a lawyer. And as you heard, I reported this in Mexico City because I am Mexican and living in Mexico. But this religion does it all over the world. If enough large countries start looking into it, then more and more smaller countries will start following suit. And if multiple countries are looking into this at the same time, they will be spread thin, maximizing the pressure for them to change their illegal practices. I don't consider making these videos activism. I don't care if someone does, but I personally don't, for reasons I made clear years ago in one of the very first videos I made. That being said, reporting this religion to the government and pressuring them to either change their ways or to force them to bleed money is definitely activism. Not just activism, but unprecedented activism. And you don't need a channel like mine to do it. You just need to get involved. That is why I need your help. In the description, you will find a link with all of the evidence and step-by-step instructions on how to do what I did in your country. I have instructions on how to replicate this in the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Mexico, and of course, the home of this cult, the United States, with more countries to follow. All I need you to do is to follow the link and follow the instructions. You might need to spend just 5 minutes to send one email to become a permanent thorn in the flesh of this religion and to become the person who brings down their precious tax-exempt status in your country. Plus, the more of us report this to our government, the more chances we have of success. We don't need to succeed in every country. We just need to succeed in some of them. I am taking this to the end of my country, and you can support my journey. But most important of all, you can start your own activism journey by following the links and sending some emails or letters. If you can't afford a lawyer, consider hiring one yourself so you can kickstart the process of getting their tax-exempt status removed in your country. You can also consider supporting my efforts in Patreon or by making a PayPal donation. As I said, I am sure I'll need to go to Mexico City and probably even get a lawyer at some point. I actually made a mistake while filing it the very first time, and they literally asked me about my lawyer because I don't think civilians usually file suits like this. That being said, I will not stop this quest until I have exhausted all possibilities. Worst case scenario, I'll just get a credit card or a loan to get a lawyer if I need one and just take it from there. Because I truly believe this is the best chance I have to bring this religion to justice in my country and to even influence other countries to follow suit. That is why I'm taking this as far as I humanly can, and I appreciate anyone helping me along the way, which is why I will keep all Patreons and YouTube supporters updated with as many news as soon as I have them, way before I get around to putting them together for a video. Please join me in this effort. Together, we might not bring down this damaging cult, but we can give them the choice between removing one of their cultish practices or let their economy crumble when they have to pay taxes instead of depending on ours.